In this video, we'll be having a look at the Okuma Lite SX Micro Lure 6'6" rod and figuring out through hopefully somewhat scientific and real-world testing whether it's a good, solid option for BFS fishing. Before we start looking at the actual rod and what we think of it, I want to discuss why I started looking for a rod in this kind of category. I generally throw small crankbaits like this one. This is about 2.7 grams. And I usually go up to about maybe 5 or 6 grams crankbaits like this one. But I can go as light as, let's say, something like this, the Helco Sorcerer 35 mil, and that's nearly 2 grams, or sometimes go slightly heavier, like, let's say, this guy. This is a 50 mil topwater lure, and it weighs in at about 8 grams. So I generally throw a spectrum of lures from about 2.7 grams and up. But not only that, I have a tendency to fish areas where there's a very real potential for hooking into fish that are 10 kilograms or 15 kilograms or possibly even 20 kilograms.
Oh, that's something bigger. That's something much bigger.
So my issue is I'm throwing very light lures and I'm targeting fish in the 2 to 3 kilogram category, but there's a lot of potential for hooking into larger fish where you need a little bit more backbone, firstly. And secondly, I wanted a rod that I could use a size 2 or maybe a size 1 single hook on a soft plastic and still be able to set that hook on a fish with the harder mouth, like, let's say, largemouth bass. So I was looking for something with a little bit more backbone than an ultralight rod, but that would still be able to cast well down to about 2.5-ish grams, well, with an appropriately sized reel, like, let's say, the CISO Commando, or my other BFS reel, the Solo King Acura. So I wanted a rod that could still cast light, but have a little bit of backbone to handle larger fish if I were to run into them. So I shopped around and I found another rod from a local South African company, or an international company, but they locally import this guy, which is the Okuma Recon. It's not a finesse rod. It's not rated as a finesse rod at all. It's a 6'9", but it's rated down to 1/8 of an ounce. So that's about 3.5 grams, supposedly, in theory. So I purchased this guy, and I tested it out, and it was just a bit too heavy for what I really wanted. It had too much backbone, it was a little bit too stiff, and didn't work for what I wanted, really. But I had a discussion with the guys from Okuma, and they suggested I try another rod in their line, which was actually rated slightly heavier, but they suggested is absolutely a finesse rod. So they offered to send me the rod they were talking about because I'd already purchased this one. So they offered to send me this, the Okuma Lite SX, which is actually rated as a light rod, even though the rating only says 4 to 12 grams. So I was a little worried about the initial rating on the rod itself, but it being rated as a light rod kind of gave me hope, firstly. And secondly, the guys from Okuma told me the blank is substantially more flexible and substantially thinner than the Recon I had previously. So I agreed, and they sent me a copy of this guy to test out. All right, so let's look at the specs of the rod first. It weighs in at 102 grams. The tip diameter is 1.53 millimeters. The base diameter is 8.25 millimeters. It's got a total guide count of 10 and measures in at a length of 196 centimeters total when assembled. It uses a Sea Guide reel seat, which I particularly like because it's got lots of cutouts and it fits very slimly into your hand. Build quality is very, very good, I have to say. I'm not particularly fond of the silver on the rod base itself, but the rest of the rod is a nice flat black, which I'm particularly fond of. It's assembled out of a 40-ton Toray carbon blank. It uses reasonably firm, pliable, but kind of hard EVA foam. I really like the textured aluminium insert they have here on the butt cap. It's a nice little touch. Now, when it comes to rod reviews, I've always found them to be a little subjective. Um, It's usually down to taste, and that can very much color a review. I wanted to do this review so that you can kind of see an unbiased opinion of how the rod actually performs, technically speaking. So I wanted to create a set of simulation tests that would kind of create real world situations, but that would allow us to document how the rod actually performs in those situations. So I decided on three separate tests. The first would be a load test to see what the action and the power of the rod would be. Firstly, I decided to load the rod with a variation of loads that would simulate, well, fighting a fish really. So I decided to clamp the rod down at a 60-degree angle and load it up consecutively with a 200-gram weight, a 300-gram weight, and a 400-gram weight. So you can get an idea of what it is the rod looks like when you load it. Next, I did some load testing. I kind of had a hard time figuring out which angle would work best for this, but settled on mounting a GoPro on the rod during the casting process, and I found that this documented the bend in the rod while casting the best. So I tested a range of weights and settled on one that was technically well below the rod's actual rating, but still managed to load the rod well enough during casting. So I settled on my minimum weight for this test being 2 grams, and as you can see in the footage, the rod loads fairly well even at this low weight. So 2 gram is below what I'd actually want to cast with it. My ideal range would be about 2.8 grams and up from there. But you can see the rod loads fairly well or well enough to still make a decent cast. Thus, from this, it should load ideally perfectly at our ideal cast range of 3 grams or 2.8 grams and up from there. Then I moved on to distance testing. I selected the range of weights I wanted to use for this, 2 being well below the rating, but we tested it for load testing, so we might as well do a distance casting test with 2 grams as well. 2.7 grams, which is the ideal range I kind of want to be throwing most often with this rod, and then something closer to the higher end of the spectrum I'd want to be casting with it, but still well below its rod rating, and that would be 5.1 grams. So the average casting distance for 2 grams evened out to 16.9 meters. The average casting distance for 2.7 grams averaged out to 23.1 meters, and the average casting distance for 5 grams was 30.1 meters. Those, to my mind at least, are very respectable numbers for the areas I fish, and I don't really want to be casting much further than that with a BFS setup. I'm very happy with those numbers. So after the simulated testing I did, I took the rod out for actual fishing. I spent about 6 hours on the water fishing soft plastics and crankbaits, specifically for bass, and I spent another about 6 to 8 hours on the water fishing for yellowfish with specifically just crankbaits. And having landed quite a few fish with this, fish from about 500 grams up to about 2 kilograms, I'm very, very, very happy with how the rod actually loads up, specifically on small crankbaits where you're running treble hooks, size 8, size 6 treble hooks. The rod was very, very flexible enough with a moderate action to load those well enough not to worry about bending hooks out, but also not about losing fish at all or getting shaken free. Um, the rod, particularly the reel handle, makes me very happy. It's very comfortable, and because you have contact with the blank itself, it's quite nice and sensitive with regards to feeling bottom composition and feeling actual interaction with the bait itself. So, who should actually be looking at this rod, or why would this rod be ideal for you? I would suggest if you were a bass angler trying to go lighter or specifically interested in going into BFS, this would be a solid bet for you. Also, if like me, you fish in areas that has bigger fish and you need more backbone to support that, that would also be a good rod for you as well. Um, Especially if you're kind of a new angler in BFS, but you're not sure you want to commit, this would be a great interim rod as well. It'll double as a normal finesse bass rod, but also allow you to do things otherwise you would only be able to do with light and ultralight spinning setups. This rod is not ideal for people that want to do ultralight casting, casting 2 grams and below, and if you want to do small stream fishing. This rod really gets you a nice bit of distance, but doesn't work well under trees because of its slightly longer length. The 6 foot sink length can be a bit of an issue if you're fishing under trees or in cover a lot. So that would be my suggestion. I think it's a very, very capable rod for BFS fishing, perhaps more closer to the power BFS spectrum, but you can easily cast 2.5 grams, 2.8 grams, and that falls well within the range for BFS. And I think the rod performs particularly well on medium to larger fish. So, would I keep this rod in my collection? Absolutely. I think it supplements my ultralight rods very nicely. And running two rods for a day, an ultralight setup for the tiny little things, and then this guy if I am concerned about the larger fish or I need a little bit more backbone. This is a spectacular rod for that, especially at the price point. All right. Thanks for watching.